Welcome back. This is episode 2 of the new Beyond the Box Score show on Fantasy Football Today Express. We're excited to get this going. Last week, we had Matthew Berry on, we had Ian Hartitz, we had Dwayne McFarland. But this week, we have a GOAT of the fantasy industry. Like, literally, when I started getting really into fantasy, he was one of my favorite people to read. Goes more in depth than anybody else. I'm going to introduce Jacob Gibbs. He's on every episode, but I want to send it over right now to our guest today, and it's Rich Hribar. Rich, how are you doing, my man? Because you put in so much work in the last 2-3 weeks. I feel like you need a break, but there's no time for a break.
No, I appreciate it. I think you called me old too, but I'll let it slide. I've been doing this for a
Veteran,
long
it's
time.
having back.
I feel it sometimes. Come check in January. How we're doing. After we break down all these 280 games that are on the horizon. But this is always my favorite time of the year because I feel like this is when I'm at my best. There are a lot of people that are good at different angles in the space, whether it be, best ball or redraft or, like someone like you, like JJ, my buddy JJ Zacharyson, like he's great at like uncovering like ADP trends and like, historical trends. I feel like I'm the best at like calibrating the things that are happening. I've been writing a matchups column for over 10 years. Again, I am old in the industry. And I'm just ready for real things to happen to adjust to, right? Like we've had these takes for 7 months and we're trying to diagnose these situations and so much stuff is going to change, whether through injuries, just being wrong. And I'm ready for that to get started.
How about you, Jacob? Where are you at right now with the season about to get underway?
Truly echo everything that Rich just said. I'm so excited to have some new information. And then my Chiefs play tonight, man. So yeah, I'm sky high right now.
I just can't wait to watch. Week 1 is a guarantee for me. I'm going to watch the tape of every single game by the time the week ends, and I'm just excited to watch that. I love getting a real feel for how these teams are going to be, especially the new coordinator teams. And you guys do a great job, both of you. Jacob had a newsletter yesterday on Fantasy Football Today, breaking up, like diving into data and matchup-driven, data-driven matchup plays. So we're going to get into a lot of that today. We're going to get into some stuff that will help you guys set your DFS lineups as well. So keep an eye out for that. But the first thing I wanted to start with, and Jacob gave me the go-ahead to say it was, because some people, Rich, believe it or not, are still drafting tonight and this weekend.
Yeah, that's true.
There are some people who draft after the first couple games. I actually have my biggest buy-in league this Saturday, and I've argued against it forever, but they have made the argument that they want to get the best possible chance of no injuries impacting this huge buy-in league, so it is what it is. But any last-minute risers, fallers for you in your season-long ranks, players like Josh Jacobs or anyone who's kind of changed a little bit in the last couple weeks for you?
The FFPC, the big weekend. This is the big FFPC and NFPC weekend in Vegas. A lot of people are headed out there. You get the free look. Now you get 2 games to look at this year because you'll get the Eagles and Packers games too. So like if you're taking a kicker, you can take Jake Elliott or Braden Narvison, and if they have 15 points, you can just keep them. But if they have like 4, you just pick up another kicker and you get a free look. Like obviously, it doesn't help you with like guys like Mark Andrews and stuff like that because you might you're probably not gonna like sit those guys anyways, even if they have like an okay game. But it is fun to get a free look at those guys, especially like the Packers wide receivers, right? Like you can just take a Packers wide receiver, and if one of them has a big game, good luck on figuring out which one it'll be, tomorrow night. But you can get those guys in your lineup or remove them. It's kind of fun that way. So if you are drafting, there's some unique wrinkles to it. I mean, a couple guys that just moved up for me. I mean, the interesting thing is like, about Josh Jacobs, like if you drafted Josh Jacobs, you got like immense closing line value. But I do think that there's some hesitation on like drafting him where he's been going in the drafts I've still been doing. I still do think like long haul, we could see some of the things that maybe were projected in for skepticism for him, like of a Marshawn Lloyd being involved in like an Aaron Jones lightish type of role down the stretch of the season, or LaFleur just doing LaFleur things like he's done. I mean, this is a guy that split Deion Lewis and Derrick Henry's workload at one time in his career. But your early season run out is great. So I just want to be careful not to just double count though and say like, all right, I missed closing line value, so now I have to buy him at the highest point. I think I'm willing to just let a lot of gamers just accept that I lost the closing line value on him, and I'm probably not going to take him like I still like Derrick Henry just outright more than him, even though he's older. So I'm still just going to wait on Derrick Henry. I think a lot of the things you can point for being positive for Jacobs, like you can still say like you can squint and see it for Joe Mixon too. You do have to do some squinting for it, but he's a little cheaper as well. So now that he's priced in with some receivers I like, I'm a little more hesitant to grab him. But One guy that I was high on and then I got outright scared on is George Pickens because of the Ayuk stuff, but now that's in the rear view. Like, I think we can go back to being kind of aggressive with him, especially where the guys that he's been going with. I don't think that it's far-fetched when we come back with the 10,000 foot view and see that he like competed with guys like Drake London or, maybe even a guy like Chris Olave if the touchdowns run hot enough. These wide receivers that are the year 2, year 3 wide receivers with him. I mean, he has a lot of underlying metrics that were as good or better than those guys. He's been a better player than Drake London through 2 years in the NFL. Now, obviously, he's getting Drake London's play caller, and we're going to have to price that in. But the Steelers were already a low volume passing offense anyways last year. So I don't think it's like a major transition. I think Pickens was 44th in routes run. And then you just lose Deontay Johnson. I mean, his target share is going to be so high. And this is a guy that has pedigree. He was a hot Devy prospect, when he was entering Georgia. It's a real good prospect that people were on. And like, it feels like no one kind of likes him. Like, it just kind of feels like everyone's like, whatever. Russell Wilson. But Russell Wilson, had the 7th lowest inaccurate throw rate to wide receivers last year. Kenny Pickett was 42nd last year. It is an upgrade until we potentially see Justin Fields. And the last guy I think they got the best run out in the last week or two was probably Terry McLaurin.
Yes.
For a couple of reasons. Obviously, you lose Jahan Dotson, and like there's just like very limited target competition on this target tree. We don't really know who the horizontal rate is going to incorporate outside of Luke McCaffrey, Noah Brown, Diami Brown, the ghost of Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler. There'll be a lot of sideways passes, though. We know that. But what's cool about McLaurin is not only do I think he's going to get a career high in targets this year, I think his career high is 132. I think he's going to push like 150 north of it, especially with how many plays the Washington Commanders could run if there's some efficiency. And then potentially getting the best quarterback he's had, which is wild to think about. I mean, he's only had more than 100 targets from 2 different quarterbacks in his career, and they're Taylor Heineke and Sam Howell. But the horizontal rate actually is going to help a guy like Terry McLaurin. So the big bugaboo for Terry McLaurin is he's had to live, and Jacobs talked about this with Chris Olave a little bit too, is like he's had to live on a diet of targets that come with inherently low success rates. They're great when they connect, right? Like they're big fantasy points and you catch one of these bombs, but the horizontal rate is going to give him more like fantasy smoothing types of targets as well. Like he's going to catch his ADOT's probably going to be the lowest of his career. And he's going to have some more of those weeks where you don't have to live on the 40-yard Terry McLaurin touchdown because he might chip in like an extra 2.5 receptions per game or something like that. Right. Like, so especially where like he was going like wide receiver 30-ish. I mean, I think he belongs like at least in the neighborhood of like Amari Cooper or like those guys like around that wide receiver 20-ish range. So those are kind of the 2 guys like I still feel good about like taking the better in like that back end, like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range.
You're speaking a lot of my language here, Rich, because Mixon and Henry are 2 guys that I've been higher on than Jacob all offseason. We've kind of gone back and forth. And then Pickens is a guy, like you said, people forget he does have that prospect pedigree. Another thing I've really liked is one thing you mentioned is, the upgrade, and it's right, going from Pickett to Russell, but it's also the upgrade in system. Yes, I know it's Arthur Smith, but you don't understand how bad things were with Matt Canada. Like the routes I've already seen Pickens running this preseason are routes that he won with at Georgia. So it's not like these are in-breaking routes that he can win. He can use his body size to win. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of those easy targets for Pickens this year as well. So I'm excited.
You look at the new fantasy points data stat average separation score. Pickens best in the league on slants.
Right.
Could be fun. Yeah, Matt Canada's truly been as bad as it could be. So I'm excited for Pickens and Deontay Johnson in that regard. Just real quick, I'm curious on a few guys. I want to move Pickens up. I've kind of been there with you guys on Pickens, been cautiously optimistic about him. I think he's better than people give him credit
I think
for.
Cautiously optimistic is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But I just can't get there in terms of like moving him ahead of Tank Dell or T. Higgins or Rashee Rice or Mike Evans or Deontay Johnson. Like, are you moving him ahead of any of those guys?
I think it depends on your scoring. Like if it's half point PPR, I mean, I still think there's an outcome where Pickens has, an 8 touchdown season or better, cautiously optimistic, versus those guys. I mean, Tank Dell is probably the trickiest guy for me because from a talent, it's like one of these things that it's tough, right? From a talent perspective, I think he's one of the better receivers in the league. Oh, yeah. I think the situation makes it tricky from a projection stance, and his ADP is already aggressive. So like, what if there's a scenario where, because he's due like massive touchdown regression. I mean, he scored he scored 4 touchdowns from outside of the red zone. He had the highest conversion rate on end zone targets in the NFL last year for anyone that had 5 or more. And we don't know like if he's going to be limited into only playing 3 wide receiver sets. And we know that Houston's going to run more 3 wide receiver sets, but Bobby Slowick and the coaching tree he comes from like is a pretty big signal that they are going to play a fullback more than we want them to, right? And Bobby Slowick also, I'm going to let everyone know this now in week 1 before we start the season. He's going to run the football on early downs more than you want him to. More than any of us want him to.
And in the red zone more than you want him to.
I mean, we just have to be ready for it as fantasy gamers. They've got all these fun toys. They got CJ Stroud. Everything's arrows pointing up. The offensive line's healthy entering the season. They had Joe Mixon. But I promise you that this is what these guys do.
Yes.
This is what this coaching tree does. Like they're gonna
do something. I'm worried about the same with Waldron as well.
Yeah, I mean that's so that's in play. So I mean, Tank Dell's been a guy like someone in my room always likes him more than I do, and it's a bummer because I really love the player. But from a fantasy stance, I feel like he's being the inverse of George Pickens, like where we said cautiously optimistic on George Pickens. I feel like it's like what would we phrase that like almost like not reckless, but like we're pricing in a lot of upside that potentially like no downside in for this. Especially with peers, right? Because you were talking about like in tiers, like there's a scenario where Pickens has 40 more targets than Tank Dell
easily.
So so it's tough. I mean, Tank Dell's been one of the hardest guys for me. I hope he doesn't bury me because I didn't get a lot of him, but I do love the player. I wrote him up for keeper leagues. I wrote him up and said, if you're in a keeper league, aggressively play Tank Dell because we think Diggs will be. We think Diggs is just a 1-year rental. They restructured his contract so he can be an unrestricted free agent. I doubt they have the salary to kind of give Diggs another because Diggs is going to try to cash in one more time.
I mean, they could, given what the 49ers have done this offseason. I assume just everyone has the salary to do whatever they want if they want to push enough back, but I don't think they'll go that direction as well. I have one question I wanted to ask you before we move on to a different subject. A lot of the great work you guys do over at Sharp Football Analysis is based on, gambling and Vegas odds and implied odds and things of that nature. I want to know which teams you think are most likely, and I guess maybe least likely, or most likely to outperform and most likely to underperform their Vegas implied totals, because I think that's a good way to start. Like, we need to factor in which teams are going to score the most and which teams aren't, as far as what we're targeting for fantasy and how we're going to move forward.
Well, I don't think this one necessarily ties into fantasy, but I think the Jets number has been a little too low. I mean, the Jets schedule is just everything just lines up perfectly for them. I mean, even their hard games over the front half of their schedule, the 49ers, they get with basically Ayuk and Trent Williams practicing for a week. They're not going to have Dre Greenlaw on defense. Hufunga's probably going to be a limited snaps player in the opener. So they do have a shot to win this game in the opener. But then their other hard games, they get the Bills at home on a Monday night, and then they play the Texans at home on a short week on a Thursday night. So it's like a pseudo like rest advantage for them in that game. And then the rest of their front half schedule, like they're home against the Patriots, they're home against the Broncos, they play the Steelers, they play the Titans, they play the Patriots twice actually in that run. Like there's a scenario where we're looking at through their first 11 weeks, their buys week 12, and they're like 8-3 or better. Like that like really exists. And I know that's like kind of chalky, but like their win total's been like actually priced in respectively low, especially compared to how aggressive they set it last year. And inversely, I think the Bills are a team like has been priced up high because of the Josh Allen factor, but they are in such a tough division. They have such a hard schedule and they have all these moving parts. Like what if like it's just Josh Allen in the same situation that Patrick Mahomes was in last year offensively, but the Bills don't have that defense the Chiefs had a year ago. I mean, they're replacing so many snaps, especially in the secondary. They're a team I could see like, and I don't think the Bills are going to bottom out. That's not, I don't want to say, oh, Rich, the Bills are going to be sucked, but their win total's 10.5. Like what if they win eight or 9 games, right? Like they're a team I can see having some potential struggles based on all the changes that they had. Those are 2 teams, but I can say from like just a top down stance of like teams for fantasy that we're generally looking to have like success. And I talk about a lot is I'm looking at just like the current defensive meta and the offensive meta, like the way the NFL is played right now, right? Like we're seeing man coverage played at a lower rate than we've ever seen it played in the NFL. We're seeing lighter defensive fronts than we ever seen played. We want the teams are leaving the middle of the field open. And last year was the first time since it's been recorded that dropbacks had a negative EPA per play. like that first time ever. Like, and a lot of it goes back to just this transition. And it's funny because, I wrote about the Konami code all the way back in 2013, but it's this infusion. I think that a lot circles back to like this infusion of just that athletic quarterback play versus pocket quarterback play, and not the marriage of the two worlds. And we've seen more. So shotgun's gone up, like rate of shotgun snaps have gone up in the NFL. Last year, play action dropped way down. But even with these last 2 years of like scoring being down, plays under center and play action passes still are like having immensely high success rates. They're just going down because we're seeing more quarterback play like not played in the traditional drop back game. And that's, I think, hurt the NFL a little bit. And so I'm looking at these teams, and it's funny, a lot ties back to two coaching trees, the Shanahan coaching tree, the McVay coaching tree. And there's some guys that get it, obviously Andy Reid and Ben Johnson. But I'm looking at these offenses that can be multiple. And what I mean by that is that, they're able to throw and pass out of their base offense. Like they're not required to just drop back and like operate with like a quarterback out of shotgun. They can get a guy under center. They can run play action. Like McVay does it with 3 wide receivers, but they will run the hell out of ball. They want to get you in those late fronts, and then they're going to run outside zone and run it all over you. Like McVay is run all the time. Like he's actually a running coach. It just doesn't get any notes for it. And what's funny, Zach Taylor's kind of been like a pass, almost aggressive on a passing coaching tree, but like it hasn't really worked out for him. Kind of inversely from this direct fall for him. And then Shanahan coaching tree, they're the opposite. They want to play two wide receivers, get you coming up, and then they want to run play action. They want to throw over the middle of the field, right? But that's what I'm looking at. A lot of these offenses that can operate like that to beat the way the NFL is structured, and you have like those two coaching trees. And again, I would include the Lions and Chiefs in that mold as well, because look at all the teams the last 2 years that are like still in, because we've been in a defensive meta the last 2 years. Offensive production is down, but look at all these teams that are still having success, and then go look at those coaches and look at what they do offensively. So it's a big deal, because we did see a lot of offensive coordinators get hired from this tree this year. In this week 1, we're kind of looking for some like unveiling on some of these things. 15 new offensive coordinators, 17 new defensive coordinators this year.
Yeah.
So it's half the league. I mean, it's half the league is implementing new coaches. So like we got to use these early weeks to kind of see like what we're going to get, and some cards flipped over.
I got to get in here with a few things. So if you guys read the FFT newsletter, you have probably noticed, like when I was doing the team previews, I couldn't stop gushing about some of these coordinators that he's hitting on here and the ability to be multiple on offense. I went on about Bobby Slowick forever, obviously Shanahan, McDaniel, Ben Johnson. I have heard you, Rich, mention that you have thought about just doing a fantasy draft where you only
I've done a couple best balls.
Only pick the players from these teams, like basically the Shanahan tree, the McVay tree, and then the Chiefs and the Lions.
Yeah.
And it sounds simple and intuitive. It's like, yeah, draft good, players from good offenses, but like truly, I think it might really work. So I'm really curious to follow up and hear how that went for you at the end of the year.
Yeah, I am too. I'm curious because I mean, you can get some value. Obviously, there's the 49ers guys are expensive, but you can get value on guys like Rashid Shaheed. There's some other systems like down the line, like the Titans are a team that are a wild card, right? Like there's definitely a negative outcome for the Titans, but there's like no upside priced in any of their players. And like, what if it just works? Like, what if it just works? I mean,
Titans and Saints being two teams that have coordinators from those trees, for people who might not know that. Couple other things I wanted to follow up on. To Dan's question about teams exceeding, my pick would be the Seahawks. I think that they're criminally underrated by the market, especially in terms of the points they're expected to score. And I wanted to hear your guys' input on that. Like, I'm so excited for Grubb. We got a really small sample of it this preseason, but it looked like it checked all the boxes of all the things we wanted to see, working down the field, playing with pace, all of that. Are you guys with me there? That would be my first bet to like exceed their expectations.
I'll jump in first here because I feel like Rich might be on your page here. I have gone back and forth. I actually watched your cut up, Jacob, of their first team offense in the preseason, and I liked what I saw schematically. My thing that's been holding me back with Seattle this entire offseason has been I'm not sold on that offensive line. And I don't think necessarily that offensive line improved this offseason. I think they got worse, losing one of their starting interior players. They've been unhealthy, and that's been a big problem for Charles Cross and for the I forgot the second round tackle on the other side. But not necessarily been putting out great tape even when they have been healthy. So if that offense is going to work the way it wants to work, like I watched a lot of Michael Penix tape this offseason because he might have been a Giants quarterback, and that offense worked because they provided him time and he had all day back there. if Geno Smith doesn't have that same amount of time back there, I think things could get really ugly for that offense. And I've never been a huge fan of their run game. I know they're going to rebuild it now under Grubb, but they really just ran all zone with Kenneth Walker the past 2 years. And it's just a matter of like getting him back in some power gap. Do they have the guys to run power gap? Do they have the guards to pull? Do they have like the necessary infrastructure to add in those power gap concepts and have them work right away? So I have questions about their run game and I have questions about their pass protection.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line's the big kind of, thorn for them. But I will say if Grubb, can manipulate kind of and incorporate the things we talked about being multiple, like you can mitigate offensive line play. Like we've seen Mike McDaniel do this 2 years in a row. Like the Dolphins have literally had, not only have they had a bad offensive line, they can't keep anyone on the field. Like guys and so that's one of my pros for like, Clint Kubiak and the Saints, because one of the big pushbacks they get pushed on the Saints is about their offensive line too. And it's like, well, this system, I mean, look at what Shanahan's even done outside of Trent Williams, what they put on the field outside Trent Williams last year. So it is up to Grubb to kind of, and how he schematically, operates this offense to kind of mitigate what is we know going in. If we know that offensive line's their biggest link, they know it as well. So hopefully he's going to do some things around that. I love the pieces. And if you just keep Geno Smith clean, I mean, he was still really good last year from a clean pocket. So if they can do those things, he can be good. So, and I like the thing I like about the Seahawks though, in general, is I think they have the pieces defensively. So the Mike McDonald hire, like that's where, how quick can he get these guys kind of turned around? Because he's got 2 cornerbacks that, Riq Woolen as a rookie played a lot better last year, but Riq Woolen is still like a physical freak. Like he has the length and speed to be kind of a demon. And then Devin Witherspoon was awesome. So like the defense is kind of what I'm thinking like might be underrated, because that's where they disappointed last year. Like they couldn't stop the run at all last year. And then, like I said, Riq Woolen kind of underperformed, but like I like the call. They play in a tough division, but I could see the Rams being a team that kind of is in the middle of where expectations were last year. Now the expectations were set this year, because the Rams were a team that they were 2-7 as an underdog last year. Like they had a last place schedule, remember, last year, and they took advantage of that, but they didn't punch up a lot last year. They didn't beat a lot of teams that they shouldn't have beaten in the first place, right? And that's how you need these teams to make a jump. Like you got to win some games that we didn't think you were going to win entering the season. And so with the Rams and all the changes they've had, like I can see the Rams shedding a couple wins this year, and then Seahawks maybe gets them. Cardinals are a wild card too. I just don't think they've put enough defensively. And granted, they shouldn't. Like they've built this thing. They've streamlined this new regime of building offense first. And they said, Jonathan Gannon, your defensive coach, make what you can about it for 2 years. We're going to kick the can on adding any defensive talent, because they haven't added any in the last 2 years. And then we'll see what you get. We'll try to get you pieces, because I think that they're going to start investing heavily on defense now moving forward, that they've got Kyler locked up. They add Marv, obviously McBride hit. They get, Paris Johnson last year in the trade. So it's like, all right, like we're done adding offense. It's time to start adding some defensive pieces. But Cardinals are a wild card too. I think Petzing is probably the next guy in for a head coaching job. He did an excellent job his first year, given what he had to work with.
That is exactly what I was just going to say. I've had a little bit of time to study Drew Petzing, and he put together some unbelievable game plans last year. He's the next guy at coordinator. So if you're looking for those types of things, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to talk a lot about matchups. And one thing that you mentioned that stuck out to me, Rich, was the increase in the NFL of middle of the field open, which for those who don't know, that means split safety looks with the middle field open, and what that might mean for tight ends. And this could be the year of the tight ends. That's something it's a Jacob Bull prediction that you can find over on CBSSports.com. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and a lot more. But let's take a quick break.
Mr. Richard?
Yeah, Doc.
Unfortunately, Mr. Nibbles crossed the Rainbow Bridge moments ago.
He was the best hamster I have ever known.
I know this is a difficult time for you, but would you happen to know of any deep stash dynasty tight ends I could zero in on for my draft tonight?
Jatavion Sanders.
Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss.
All right, we're back here on Beyond the Box Score. We've got Rich Hribar. We've got Jacob Gibbs. We're going to dive a little bit here into some notes from Jacob on the Houston passing game. Trey McBride, a Jacob Gibbs favorite. Dalton Kincaid, another Jacob Gibbs favorite. Brian Thomas Jr., and then JSN, who is becoming another Jacob Gibbs favorite. So a lot of your favorites here, Jacob. What do we got on these guys?
Yeah, I was getting so excited. I'm like, we've got to talk about week one. The more I heard Rich talk about these teams, like the Cardinals, the Bills, I'm so excited for that matchup. I'm so excited to see Seattle, and how I hear this narrative a lot that like Mike Mack's defenses might be leaky at first, like might take time to like really find cohesion. And so like who's going to maybe take advantage of that on the Denver side of things?
Hmm.
But Cortland Sutton's matched up against Reek Woolen, who Rich brought up, and is like the exact prototype of a cornerback who could like actually give Sutton some problems. For me, it's McLaughlin, I think, is the guy who might break a few big plays. But yeah, let's start with Buffalo and Arizona. I'm so excited for the tight ends in this game. I think both of them are positioned really well. I saw some great stats mentioned from Josh Norris today, from the worksheet from Rich, about Dalton Kincaid, and his lack of involvement in the red zone. And I think we might see that shift in week one right away here, because it could be a really, really high scoring game. And the matchup is perfect in terms of Arizona really allowing a lot of open looks over the middle of the field. So I guess I want to just throw it to Rich, and see what you are thinking about these two games, these two spots, these two offenses. Do you think we're overreacting to Matt Milano being out and how that's going to affect Trey McBride? How much do you think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be involved? Like, take it any direction you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see this game. This might be a line that ends up being a little too wide too. I mean, like you said, the Cardinals were feisty last year. They hung around some games. Eventually, their defense just couldn't get enough stops, and maybe that's the case again. But the Bills have so many moving parts. Like what if they just kind of do? It takes a little bit for this to kind of come together. And I'm going to find out. Especially the wide receiver play. Now, this game it might not matter. They might just be able to run through James Cook and Dalton Kincaid, and it might just be enough, right? Given to where all the limitations the Cardinals defense had. They couldn't stop the run at all. They also couldn't guard running backs out of the backfield because their linebackers aren't good either. Again, they didn't stop any tight ends. So James Cook and Dalton Kincaid just could be massive in this game. And it could just be all the Bills need. And then we still trying to figure out which wide receiver to kind of chase for the rest of the season because they might not need any of them in this one. But that's the big thing for Dalton Kincaid, right? It's hard to draw up a lot of iterations of this season when you run it in the multiverse and you simulate this season where like he just doesn't lead the team in targets or get a lot of targets. The question will be just, can we get his usage in the red zone to flip? And, obviously that's a James Cook problem too, because when you have a guy like Josh Allen, you want to use in the red zone because you make defenses play 11-on-11 football. It's an advantage for you. And that's kind of the big bugaboo, but he didn't score a touchdown in the red zone last year. He actually had fewer end zone targets than Dawson Knox. And we've got Diggs and we've got Gabe Davis leaving, 25, end zone targets on the table here from a year ago. Who gets those? We got an inkling they want Keon Coleman to like be something like Gabe Davis, but the concerns for Keon Coleman, he did not alleviate any of those this preseason. I mean, he couldn't get open against backups in the preseason. So like we still have a large leap of faith to take for Keon Coleman. I like Shakir a lot as a player. I hope that he gets the opportunity that we would like him to see, but I just don't know if he's going to be like in any type of rotation with Curtis Samuel or they see them in any type of overlap. It's some guesswork, but I think this particular game, we're going to see Dawson, or not Dawson Knox, because say no on mine, Dalton Kincaid and James Cook just be like the catalysts of this offense, given where Arizona kind of struggles and where they project to struggle again this year.
Yeah, Dan and I have been pretty out on James Cook, but like if ever there's a spot for him, it's right here. If I've got him in a few like dynasty leagues and stuff, and I might consider selling him right away after week one because he could go nuts in this game.
This could be a spot where even if you're like you drafted like a super zero RB team and like you were just like, man, you're just looking at who you have to maybe play at RB2 this week. And like if you were going to take a shot on Ray Davis, like it would be like this type of environment, especially if Curtis Samuel's limited in any capacity. Just because because just from a blanket spot, 6-point home favorite against one of the league's worst run defenses, we're projecting again to be a bad run defense. You can squint and say, all right, maybe I can get the box here.
Are we concerned at all about Arizona's implied total for this game? Because it's honestly relatively low, but like it feels like a game where the Cardinals could hang around or even beat the Bills. And it feels like we want to start McBride and all these guys. But like, where's Kyler for you guys? Because I still have him below Jaden Daniels this week. And I know that sounds crazy, but like 21.5, I think, is the total for Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where are you at with that, Rich?
Yeah, I'm positive on all the moves. I mean, this is a team that showed last year, even with their offensive line, like Drew Petzing coordinated a good run game, and the reserves behind James Conner are better this year.
Right.
In the 4 weeks Conner missed, I mean, Arizona running backs were 21st in the league in EPA, 20th in success rate. Now you add Trey Benson, you just have a better player. We saw this similar with a couple other teams, right? That like people freaked out about that. Like these guys that had these unsustainable workloads, like Kyron Williams last year, like James Conner for the stretches that he had to play, like Rashad White, and the people add they double count these running backs, like these reserves.
Yeah.
And like, listen, the guys that they played outside of those guys last year were awful. They were always going to try to improve in that department. And like, you weren't going to see guys don't roll over 75% opportunity shares in NFL backfields anymore. Like it happens out of necessity. So make sure not to double count like all of those things across the board this week. But I do think they're gonna be able to run the ball. The Bills were a very kind of Jekyll and Hyde run defense last year. I think the strength of their defense is still their defensive line, and then we're going to try to figure out all the other moving pieces. I mean, it's a great story that Damar Hamlin's starting in this game for Damar Hamlin and for football fans, given what happened to him in his life. But this is a guy that played 18 snaps last year on defense, and now he's starting. He's a starting player for you. Like we've got guys moving all over the place, at cornerback. So I think it's a sneaky spot to where at least the 6 points is too high, and maybe Arizona hangs around. The biggest question is just the defense, right? Like if you're playing this from a betting angle and you're taking the 6, but I think Arizona's going to move the football in this game, to answer your question, and it'll probably be through McBride and through Harrison and the run game. So I actually, if I have my Cardinals, even though the spot objectively doesn't look great, I mean, these guys are all starting guys for me this week.
That's kind of where I'm at too. I've got Connor ahead of James Cook, who you love the matchup for him. I have him ahead of Rashad White, ahead of Isaiah Pacheco this week. Yeah, I think he's going to get fed.
There's one game and one player specifically I really wanted to get into with you on this podcast, Rich. And one thing I think you do a really great job of in the offseason is your tiers-based rankings. And I got to say, one thing I really appreciate about them is how unique they are. They're not like cookie cutter what you see. And one thing that I noticed with the quarterbacks is you're very high on the Konami code. Like you got Deshaun Watson way up there, higher than anyone has Deshaun Watson. I'm with you on that, by the way. Like I had Watson way higher in my rankings. I think people are. Now, we'll see. This arm could be shot. Honestly, like it could be a Cam Newton situation with the shoulder just totally being – we'll find that out soon. But I like that offensive line. I like that coordinator. We'll see. And I like the weapons. But another player who was high on your rankings that I just really want to know your thoughts on for this matchup, is he somebody who we can put in our DFS lineups as potentially a league-winning pick or a week-winning pick, is Jaden Daniels. What's going to happen against Todd Bowles' defense? With what we've seen in the preseason, is that what we're going to get from Kingsbury? Are we going to get anything extra? I really hope the answer is yes, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is gonna be a fun one, right? Like Todd Bowles versus a rookie quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, I'd said he's gonna blitz as the plane lands. Like there's a blitz coming when the plane lands on Jaden Daniels. The good thing about it is, we see this is what Todd Bowles does. I mean, again, they were third in the NFL in blitz rate last year. But here's the cool thing about that could aid Jaden Daniels. Well, one, he could just run for a lot of yards because if the blitz comes, because he was a guy, he either ran or took a sack on 40% of his pressures last year. That's like the one thing from a dynasty perspective. Like his one worry is like he's on the Justin Fields archetype if they clean it up, but he wasn't sacked on any of his 15 dropbacks in the preseason. He wasn't pressured because the horizontal raid isn't going to let you get the ball's coming out. The ball's coming out in the horizontal raid. But what I think there's some pros if Jaden Daniels can roll over from his college game to the NFL in this matchup. I mean, he had a 74% on target throw rate against the blitz entering the NFL. That was second in this draft class. He was also blitzed a lot at LSU. Fourth highest rate in this class, 39% of his dropbacks. And the Bucs blitz a lot, but they don't also get pressure on their blitz. I mean, they really struggled last year. They only created pressure on 41% of their blitzes. It was 22nd in the NFL. And when the Bucs blitzed and didn't get pressure, they were 22nd in the NFL in yards allowed per pass attempt. So they will give up some big plays. If we get the horizontal raid to actually push one downfield. They also just have some moving parts to themselves. Obviously they traded Carlton Davis. They are going to be relying on, some new cornerbacks here too. They've got Jamel Dean still rolled over, but you're going to have third rounder Tyke Smith applied to their nickelback. 2022 fifth rounder Zion McCollum is going to start outside for them. And this is a guy that had their lowest graded pass coverage grade of any cornerback that they're kept on their team this year. And he's going to be playing a large role for them. So I like a guy like Terry McLaurin that we talked about. I think this is a good spot for him, especially in this matchup, to maybe be a guy that flies under the radar week 1 DFS. So some of these spots that we talk about, a lot of people are going to play in DFS. They're going to be like, well, we have to wait to see it to believe it. And then we can take advantage of some of those spots, right? Because some of these things that we believe are going to happen, because a lot of fantasy gamers, and this is how people play fantasy football. It's the only fantasy sport that's played like this too, because I have a huge fantasy baseball background, and I quit it because it was every day, and it's hard. But fantasy footballers are so backwards driven. They want to look back on what happened last year or what this player did last week, and like not think about what's going to happen now or what's going to happen in the future. It's a really weird space, especially in the off season. For 7 months, we talk about what guys did last year. It's like, well, that's not, the situation's different. So like a guy like Terry McLaurin, I think in week 1, especially in this matchup where we could get the road Commanders chasing a lot of points, it could be a Terry McLaurin like spot where if I am aggressive on him, I want to be aggressive in DFS because I don't think the field's going to be as aggressive as I am.
Yeah, I love it.
I've got a fun set on Jaden. So when pressured, Jaden Daniels scrambled 30% of the time last year. Among round 1 quarterbacks drafted since 2016, he's the only one to have a rate above 20%. And he did it in 4 separate seasons. Like, he legitimately could run like double-digit times in this game. He could run for 100 yards in this game. He also could take 8 sacks. Like, I'm all in on him in DFS.
Rate was pretty high too, was it not?
Yeah, I'm all in on Jaden for DFS this week, and also I think that Tampa Bay's defense is a pretty good DFS play as well. So go whichever way you want with it.
Yeah, and you want, and a lot of people think of like DFS from picking, not to make a whole defensive special teams thing here segment, but we will. A lot of people are just going to jam the Bengals in, but one, you never want to play a chalky defense because of the variance that defenses score, but you actually want defenses in these games that are projected to be higher scoring and have a lot of dropbacks because they create more opportunities for those negative plays. I mean, there's an outcome where Bengals Patriots is just like a gross game, and the Bengals have an okay, like a statistically good defensive game, but they only get 2 sacks and 1 turnover, right? And they're the chalky defense. They don't even blow the lid off. But in these games with these high dropbacks, the most famous one's obviously the 100-point Chiefs-Rams game. Remember there was like 3 defensive touchdowns in that game. Yeah. And like, because that's what you want for a DFS environment. So like, I like the Bucks as a defensive call, and I like the Texans as another defensive call too. Like in games that could be like the game total there might be 60 total points, but you're going to get a lot of dropbacks and a lot of opportunities for these, for sacks and turnovers, especially with Anthony Richardson, almost with an extension of Jaden Daniels. And the one difference between Jaden Daniels and a guy like Anthony Richardson is Jaden Daniels actually has like an objective passing profile entering the NFL. And like, we are still now, because he only played 2.5 games last year, really. Anthony Richardson now, we just haven't seen him be a consistent down-to-down passer.
Right.
So like that still exists. The Colts ride is going to be fun, I think, like overall for like, if you have Anthony Richardson in fantasy, like the points will come, but the consistency on a drive by drive basis, I think is going to be frustrating. Like, we're going to see this work for a quarter where like the Colts are moving the hell out of football, and they might just have 2 drives. They look like the worst offense in the NFL.
Yeah.
Like, and it's going to oscillate like that. You'll still get fantasy points because they have Shane Steichen gets it. They're going to play with tempo, and they have playmakers, but you're going to be times where you're watching the Colts and you're like, I can't believe like I drafted this guy.
Yeah.
I'm worried about this matchup for Rich, especially like containing those edge rushers. I think the strength of their left tackle played really well last year, Indy, but I think the strength of the line is kind of the interior, and this Houston edge rush might be like the best 1-2 pairing in the league. I want to get to the Miami game. So Ryan Nielsen, new defensive coordinator for Jacksonville. I think a lot of people are expecting the run defense to be shored up. It was very bad last year. Nielsen, meanwhile, had the best run defense in the NFL while he was in Atlanta. I don't necessarily know if we're going to see that in week 1. They also added Eric Armstead. I think he's more of a pass rushing threat than he is like some, ultimate run stopper. I'm still expecting Miami to be able to gash them on the outside with these outside zones. I think it's a huge spot for both running backs in Miami. I have both of them in the top 10, which is way higher than consensus, I noticed. And then on Jacksonville, I really love this spot for Brian Thomas Jr. I think people are going to be conservative with him, even in DFS, even though he's cheap. So I definitely want to be well overweight on him for tournament play. And then I think this is a spot where you could trust him in a season-long league if you have to. I think Miami's defense is going to be a lot worse. I think this is going to be a shootout. And I think they're going to take some deep shots to BTJ. And I think he just looked so good this preseason. We'll see what the actual target numbers look like. But yeah, those are just. And then the other thing is anyone going to be surprised if ETN just comes out and has like an 80% snap share and 25 touches and goes nuts in this game?
Yeah, he's the one guy from that pocket of guys where we talked about they didn't do anything to change the reserves.
Yeah.
Like they're just hoping Tank Bigsy's better. And again, he should be because the bar is really low for what Tank Bigsy did as a rookie.
Tank Bigsby looked good this preseason. I'm still in on Tank Bigsby.
But ETN's one of the guys throughout the process I was higher on just because from a projectable stance. I mean, there is some longer concerns, like their back end schedule is really rough, but like that stuff that's nebulous and could be fluid. It could change. I try not to factor that in too heavily when you're looking at stuff. You want to, when you're looking out from 10,000 feet, like when we get to those matchups, they might not be hard.
Right.
So I just think from a workload stance, Doug Peterson can tell us they want to alleviate the amount of touches that Travis Etienne had last year, but this is also a guy that's largely going to be on the hot seat this year as a head coach, and the reserves just aren't very good. I don't think they're very good players. So how are we going to take ETN off the field?
It's a great point.
Do you guys have any preferred angles for attacking this game? If you are doing DFS type stuff, do you prefer to go with the passing games, especially in Miami? You kind of have to choose one or the other if you're building, one lineup because they're so expensive. But I love the value on Waddle too.
Yes.
So I was just
I'm a little more cautious on Waddle just in the opener, just because of the preseason, the calf stuff or the unknown calf stuff. Just because Waddle has been so far through this NFL career, he's like a sports car. When you pull it out of your garage and it's taken care of, like you're gonna gun it on the highway. But when it's got like a nick or something, like he's always one of those guys. You're like, you want him running as pure as possible. But then when he's got something going on, you always kind of be a little hesitant. I love the spot though. The one weird thing about this game is Miami has like this just unreal home field advantage early in the season. And I don't know if you guys have ever talked about this, but like the way they design their stadium is that the visiting sideline is literally just in the sun, and they it's literally in the middle of the sun, and the Dolphin side's completely shaded. And it'll probably heat index if we catch this where it's like over 100, and they have like really crazy like home field advantage splits early in the season because of this. I can't believe they're allowed to do this. It's like such a competitive advantage. If you ever seen the pictures, if you Google this, you can look it up. That's the way the stadium is designed. It's like these early games, and they play the Bills at home next week. But it's a Thursday night game, so it won't be a big deal. But this early start game, you always got to worry about like the Jaguars, like just being burnt out. And it's funny, is they're the fastest team in the NFL too. So it's like, you're gonna be just dying, and all of our guys are faster than you. But
not faster than Brian Thomas Jr. though, who went to LSU and has been practicing in Florida all year.
You say he, but you look at Tua in these spots as a home favorite under Mike McDaniel. Miami 7-1 in these spots. Tua 73% completion rate, just under 9 yards per pass attempt, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. These have typically been the spots where he has his spike weeks. So I am in on Tua. I like the idea of playing Achane with Tua because I do buy the smoke that they're selling about Achane being utilized in the passing game. And you don't see a guy like Achane play in the preseason and then run routes like he was running in the preseason and have that not be for a reason, I don't think. And
I've got a fun stat for you, Rich. You might not have heard. Achane had the same number of design targets as Rachaad White last year.
I believe it, yeah.
Total. And he played like 8 games. That's so crazy to me.
Yeah. So I like the idea of, if you're going to play Achane, to like doing it as a stacking partner with Tua. Obviously not cheap, but Achane is a little underpriced. That's why his projected ownership actually is the highest for any running back on both sites this week. So I think the way to get unique with him is actually playing him with Tua, because you might get like something. I actually think that too, inversely for the game that we talked about. I think James Cook with Josh Allen is playable. I think that's playable here. And typically like those you never want to stack the running back to the quarterback, but I think it's a way to get unique, especially because Achane's ownership is going to be really high and you're going to have to get unique with him. But I like the idea of that.
Yeah,
the Jaguars couldn't. It's a new defense, like Jacob said, and even scheme, but the Jaguars couldn't guard running backs at all last year.
Right.
So maybe that helps.
Yeah, and we're excited to see Devin Achane, and if he can have like an expanded role in the pass game. That stat you brought up, Jacob, is interesting to me. It's like it makes me reconsider like everything we've assumed about Dave Canales and Jonathan Brooks and all of that. How much of that was actually just a Baker Mayfield stat? Simplifying things for Baker to kind of revive his career. Like just check it down. If you don't see it, check it down. I remember Brian Dable did that 2 years ago with Daniel Jones. If you don't see your first read open, just run through the B gap. Also, kind of Jalen Hurts was using Steichen and Hurts were doing something like that too, and then they took that away. So, just an interesting note. We're gonna take another break, and when we come back, we're gonna talk with Rich a little bit about the Week 1 worksheet. So, I'm excited to get into that.
Can I get a spot real quick?
Yeah, sure, man. Hey, wait a minute. You're Dave Richard from FFT.
Yeah.
Huh. Hey, I snagged Alvin Kamara in the 4th round. What do you think?
Is it PPR?
Yeah, full point.
All right, we're back here.
That one either.
Yeah, these are great commercials.
These are good. I like those. I like those.
Yeah, shout out to the team working on those. But Rich, take a little bit of time first to just intro to everybody what the worksheet is for those who don't know. And I want to get into any notes that stood out to you when you put it together, because I think that's the most fun part, like putting together the worksheet, seeing what, and kind of learning things that you might have not expected.
Yeah, I mean, so the worksheet is something I've done for over a decade now. It's basically, a walk through every matchup, but it's kind of looking at things from not just the start sit lens, like just for your typical fantasy lens. It's got, information if you're someone that plays a lot of player props, if you're sports betting, it covers basically just everything, like every angle of kind of playing through this game, even if you're just a watcher. If you like to sit at home and watch a game with your father-in-law, your dad, any friends, you just want to drop a dope nugget, there'll probably be something in there to make you sound cool, but that's how it is. It's just me kind of walking through every play of every game, looking for angles to play props, to play bets, and play DFS and fantasy football. So it's been a labor of love, but I do like doing it. If I didn't do it, I don't think I'd be as good as a player either. So it helps me. It makes me better as well. So definitely, appreciate if anyone checks that out. There are free games every week. If you go to the link I sent out, it's probably my pinned tweet from the one. All the primetime games every week are always free, so you can always read the primetime games, even if you don't want a subscription or it's not something for you. You can definitely check out free content every week as well.
So what do you got from Week 1? What were some of the interesting notes that you picked up on putting it together?
We talked about a couple of them. Obviously, there was a lot of Jaden Daniels stuff with Todd Bowles, like a lot of that matchup-y stuff we talked about. A couple other matchups that I think are very interesting. Like the first one is probably a guy you didn't draft as a QB1, probably as a QB2, but a guy I think that is definitely a streamer over guys like Dak Prescott this week or Brock Purdy is Jared Goff.
Yes.
The moving pieces we have with this Rams defense. There's a chance the Rams secondary could be okay. Like they at least brought in brand name players. We'll see if these guys, bounce back. Tre'Davious White, Cameron Curl, Darius Williams were good at a time. There's a chance they can put this together and, rebound over their career. If they get even a couple of those guys just play a little bit better, it could be better. But the loss of Aaron Donald is kind of what we're looking at in this Week 1 matchup. With Aaron Donald on the field last year, the Rams were very pedestrian in pressure rate and sack rate. Anyways, they're 16th in the league in pressure rate. They were 23rd in sack rate. Now we're trying to generate a pass rush. We like the two rookies, Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, but we're asking a lot for them to be Aaron Donald out of the box, even combined, even taking two people and asking them to be Aaron Donald. And one of the things I've done throughout the worksheet forever, if you're a worksheet reader, is you always hear people talk about the home splits with Jared Goff, right? And the indoor-outdoor stuff. I'm going to tell you, it's not really that true. What has always mattered about Jared Goff the most as an NFL player is disruption. And if the Rams aren't able to put any pressure on Jared Goff, that's a huge problem. When these teams played in the playoffs a year ago, when they did not pressure Jared Goff, he was 19 of 19 in that game for 13 yards per pass attempt. If the pass rush is going to be worse, I mean, it's just spot in that game. Jared Goff had his highest completion rate, his highest yards per pass attempt. That's like a big problem for this game. If the Rams are not able to have a better pass rush, or they're significantly worse without Aaron Donald, I mean, it's a great spot for Jared Goff. We just need touchdown variance to run his way. We need the Lions to stop running in so many damn touchdowns, so we get some passing touchdowns. But he stands out to me. Like I said, I would play him over Purdy. I would play him over Dak Prescott, who was definitely drafted over him as well. I think he's a really good, solid, one QB league this week. If you're someone that waited and had to take a shot on Schneier, you got froze out. He stood out. And then the other night game is Deebo Samuel. Well, one, it's a terrible matchup for Brandon Ayuk, and where Brandon Ayuk wins, it's kind of where the Jets have always been at their best. This is an interesting game too, because we're getting Robert Saleh versus Kyle Shanahan.
Right.
Pretty cool. You know, anyone's familiar with this offense, it's him, and being able to shut it down. But we know like that style of defense, where Robert Saleh comes from, you know, from the Vic Fangio tree, they want to play a lot of quarters, they want to play a lot of cover six, and typically that's been a massive signal for the course of his career for Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is a guy that even when he played with Brandon Ayuk, out-targeted him, and that's not even factor in the rushing touches we get for him. He's just a little bit more bankable of an opportunity player than Brandon Ayuk. The one bugaboo is for Brandon Ayuk is that he still only averaged little under 7 targets per game, like 6.6 targets per game. So we want to get him in spots where he can maximize his efficiency, right? And this against this Jets secondary, it just really isn't. I mean, the past 2 years, they've been number 1 in passing points allowed per game. They allowed the lowest touchdown rate to wide receivers. But Deebo Samuel last year against cover 4, 26.5% of the team targets. He was targeted on 34% of his routes run, almost 4 yards per out run. It was 5th in the NFL. So I do think Deebo, because when you look at it from a top-down stance, you're going to be like, Jets are awesome against wide receivers. No way. It's just a down game for all of them. One, Deebo's kind of doesn't apply to the law of physics of wide receivers.
Deebo's his own thing.
And then the matchup actually signals kind of a usage for him. The Jets, interesting they were a team, obviously they've been great against wide receivers for 2 years and great against the pass for 2 years in general. So there's a trickle down, but there's a couple guys that like really are good against coverage that they run. And like one of them is Jalen Waddle, and Jalen Waddle always gives them trouble too. And it's, so you look down the line, you're 2 weeks when you play when they play the Jets to look at Jalen Waddle in this matchup too. But those are just a couple. Like Jacob had a lot of preseason nuggets in there too. You know, we did get like that early reveal. We didn't talk about it for Chris Olave. I mean, he's not going to be targeted on 50% of his routes in the regular season like he was in the small sample size, but we saw the pre-snap motion that we wanted from Clint Kubiak, right? And we're going to get those fantasy smoothing target opportunities for Chris Olave. I just think people were slept on Chris Olave this year. I feel like he gets kind of a raw deal for not being treated as having like a Garrett Wilson-like outcome. I think he's definitely like that type of talent. And then Malik Neighbors as well. Just his preseason usage was so insane that he's so cheap in DFS this week. And I know he's going to draw some popularity just because of where his price is, but I actually think that like this will probably be bar none, like the lowest he'll be priced all year.
Yeah, Neighbors is about to go nuts. I have Jared Goff at QB9 and Dak at QB18, so it's like not even close to those guys. I have Deebo Samuel at wide receiver 8 and Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 32. It's literally like the stone cold worst possible matchup for outside perimeter receivers. The Jets had the lowest first read target rate allowed, so they're forcing offenses to go where they don't want to go, and it wasn't even close. And I think like that was last year when the defense was beat up and beaten down by having to be on the field all the time. I think the Jets are coming in and beating the 49ers, honestly. I really do. Like, I think this team is like ready, and they've been waiting for this for a whole year. And like, I'm really, really excited for this spot.
Well, Rich is a 49ers fan, aren't you?
I grew up a huge 49ers fan. I've actually like kind of lost my interest over the course of doing this.
Yes.
You know, doing this for and it wasn't what you think of being like, oh, you only like your fantasy teams. It was actually as a public facing entity talking about teams and dealing with every fan base at once. And it was like looking into a mirror. And I asked my wife, I was like, was I like this? And she was like, sometimes. And I was like, oh no. Oh no. So it's like, imagine being an NFL fan, but having having that just thrown at you all the time. Because like as fantasy analysts, I'll tweet something out about fantasy and like I'll get just blowback from fans, right? And I'm just you know, it's like, you know how it is. And that's actually what turned me off. It wasn't because like, oh, you only like what you bet on. No, it was actually I got exposed to all the fan bases at once, and I was like, ooh, I don't like that. If that's a trait I'm having, I got to cut this out of my life.
It's a lot. It's a lot at times.
I like the Olave mention as well. I really, really love this spot for him. If you search my Twitter name with Olave, you'll find a lot of notes on that. I wanted to ask you guys about the Chicago-Tennessee game. We haven't talked about that one at all, and I'm really, really curious what your read is on this, either one of you.
I'll let you
I'll
start.
let you start, Dan, because
Okay.
the last time I was on a CBS show, they said I talk too much, so I want to make
I
sure
don't
I
know who
don't.
said that. We're here for the guests. I'm trying to let you talk more. I'm trying not to talk at all. I mean, my read on this game is pretty simple, I would say. I'm excited from what you said, Rich, about what could happen with this Tennessee Titans offense based on the scheme, based on the fact that Bill Callahan is there to fix the offensive line, and I do believe in that his ability to fix it. But I have a lot of skepticism about Will Levis. I watched a lot of Will Levis tape from last year. I watched even more Will Levis tape at Kentucky, and I did not like what I seen. And
this Bears defense is really good.
And this Bears defense is really good and only getting better. So I think it's going to be a different game than everyone's expecting. Because I mean, I'm the biggest Caleb Williams fan you'll find. I said he was the best prospect I studied since Luck, and that includes Trevor Lawrence. I like what he gives. I like what he provides more than Lawrence. And I think he's going to be good at quick game, which people never gave him credit for because he didn't have an opportunity at USC. But I also think that if my read on this game is correct and the Bears defense handles the Titans offense, the Bears are going to be a lot more conservative in this game. We saw a much slower pace than we were hoping for this preseason, and that's kind of a Shane Waldron thing. We saw a lot less 11 personnel than we were hoping for this preseason. So I kind of think this might end up being that game that people put money, like put DF players in their DFS lineups from and get really disappointed about.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. I think
Yeah.
we're going to see a lot of Khalil Herbert in this game.
Yeah.
That's where I sit as well. And as far as like I said, we'll use the phrase cautiously optimistic again on the Titans. I do think that starts in week 3 and beyond. These first 2 weeks, I don't think that even if they're even a little bit better, they just run into really poor draws.
Right.
To have a lot of like huge upside outcomes, even if they're better, like from a fantasy perspective. I think that you could probably still like, throw your darts at like, a guy like Calvin Ridley if you want, but like, I do think that running into this Bears defense on the road is going to be a tough ask for them. And also, I mean, the Tennessee defense could be a lot better than we think it ends up being too.
Right.
I was shocked at how high Chicago's implied point total was because I agree.
I mean, they added a lot of pieces that are just better than what they put on the field last year. And they still have a good defensive front. I mean, they're rolling over, really good players in Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons. And then you add Ernest Jones, Quandre Diggs. They replaced both cornerbacks with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie, guys that can play physical cornerback too. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one of these things. Like, I just want to see what's that?
They changed the system too. They got a highly covered. I'm blanking on his name, but the defense coordinator,
Gennard Wilson.
Yes, multiple teams, including the Giants, are trying to get him, and he's going to bring a completely different style than Shane.
He was at the Ravens.
Yep.
And like so, that's another. I'm just looking for like some early reveals in some of these situations, and the Bears are definitely one of them offensively because I don't really know how to play it. We know we can say we have a good inkling DJ Moore's gonna be the guy on the field the most and will lead the team in targets, but how much 11 do they play? How much does Rome Odunze get mixed in, right? Like, what's the backfield rotation? Is it all DeAndre Swift? Is it, is Gerald Everett going to play as many snaps as we saw him play in the preseason? Like, these are all just things we are kind of flying blind with, and we're supporting a guy we're really fans of, right? And Shane Waldron.
Right.
Like, we weren't fans of him. Like, we're mad how he used JSN last year. Like, everyone's mad how they used Jack Smith and Jigba as a rookie, and like, we're like, all right, man, give me Rome Odunze. Like, fire it up. Like, but it's a rookie quarterback in his first start. I got a trivia question for you. Who was the last number 1 pick to win in week 1?
Oh, that's great trivia.
No idea.
It's not. Well, I know who. It's definitely not. It's definitely not. It's going to be something crazy, I think, based on how you set this question up. I don't know.
It was David Carr.
Oh my God!
In the first game of Houston Texans history.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
That's a good stat.
Especially
I mean, since 2010, I mean, number 1 picks, they're 0-9-1 straight up, 1-8-1 against the spread, and that includes a few favorites because a lot of these guys that get picked number 1 go to bad teams. Right. And it does include a few favorites. Trevor Lawrence, the most recent one, the year we thought, and the Texans were going to be terrible, and they were pretty bad. They lost to the Texans. Now the situation's different. Like, Caleb is drafted into I think arguably as pristine as a spot any number 1 draft pick has been drafted into when you factor in the defense, the weapons, kind of the insulation he has. I'm not outright going to pick the Titans to win this game, but I would say like this game would be a stay away from me on a lot of fronts. Like, it just because the reasons we talked about, like we've got a lot of moving parts. We're doing a lot of guesswork. It's a rookie quarterback in his first start. Things happen, right? Like, things happen. So Yeah,
Rich,
yeah, so
in 30 seconds, I need your read on the Chargers backfield for this game against the Raiders, because I'm actually really intrigued by this game. But I think Dobbins is like maybe going to come out and have a big role, but I'm curious what you think.
I have no idea, to be honest. I wish I
Right.
had a
That's
great
the only
answer for you.
answer.
We
That's
know they're
the
going to
only
run, though. We know they're going to run. We know that we're going to see
I
wild
would
power
say
gap schemes that we just like.
my opinion of from this entering the season was that even if Dobbins was looking okay, they're still going to be cautious with him.
Yes.
Obviously, this coaching staff as well. Like, so, these are Roman's guys. These are Roman's running backs. They're coming with him.
Yep.
I had always thought it'd be like Gus Edwards for like 10 to 16 touches and like Dobbins in like the 8 to 12 range. And then maybe you get like a sprinkling of Vidal if he gets anything. But I always thought that it would be something like that. And then you just hope you get the guy that gets in the box, which is probably going to be Gus Edwards. I think this game's interesting, though, from the stance of Devontae Adams, especially from a DFS stance. And since we're labeling this DFS show, nobody wants to play Devontae Adams. Nobody wanted to draft him.
Right.
But I mean, there is some signal here. I mean, he had the highest inaccurate target rate outside of anyone that was Hollywood Brown for a guy that 100 or more targets last year. He's going from Aiden O'Connell, who was 31st in an accurate throw rate and to wide receivers, to Gardner Minshew, who was 16th. It's Gardner Minshew, but he was 16th. Look how he facilitated some Michael Pittman stuff for us last year. And Devontae Adams, and it's a new system for the Chargers too. He has absolutely eviscerated the Chargers since he's joined the Raiders.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 for 141 and 1, 8 for 177 and 2, 8 for 75, 8 for 101 and 1, 12 or more targets in all those games. And one thing I can say that I do quantifiably would bet on is that Devontae Adams gets double-digit targets.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, no one's going to want to play him.
My concern with that, and I do agree with you, I really truly believe this is going to be the slowest pace game on the entire slate by a considerable margin between Harbaugh and Pierce. Like, I think they're both gunning for like, let's run this football. Let's get this thing 10-7 and let's get out of here.
This is I don't know if they can put it lower, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll still take it. It's in it was opened at 41.
Yes.
40 and a half. It's tied for the lowest.
And it's still too high.
Still too high.
Like, if this game is 17-13 or 16-13, are you even like batting an eye?
No, I think it's going to be lower than that, honestly. And it's not even like, I believe in what Harbaugh and Robin are trying to do. I just don't think they care. Like, they're not going to have to score points in this game, and they're not going to care how it looks. They're going to be able to run the football. That's the whole thing. This whole offseason, I was high on Gus Edwards for a while, and then I kind of flipped because of all the reports and just J.K. Dobbins getting through this preseason healthy, to be completely honest, this training camp healthy. But I know they're going to have they're going to be effective running the ball, and there's going to be value there. We're going to look back and be like, why did we take these guys RB29 and RB36? Just don't know which one.
I mean, I've played it from the other angle too, like just in case the defense is bad, because all the quarterbacks these guys have had in the pros. Now, we have a sample size of Harbaugh in college having Andrew Luck and still not being aggressive. But all the quarterbacks that both guys, Harbaugh and Roman, have had in the pros have been pretty lackluster from a passing stance. And I hate to do that to Lamar, but like Justin Herbert is the absolute best quarterback either one of these guys have had, a thrower of the football. So it could incentivize them to maybe throw a little bit more than like the base rates when it's Colin Kaepernick, Alex Smith, Tyrod Taylor. I just think Herbert is a lot better player. I think we're going to see Herbert this year actually have, from an efficiency stance, probably the best season of his career. Like, things like EPA per dropback, YPA, things like that. But is he going to get enough counting stats to matter for fantasy is going to be the bugaboo.
I wonder also if teams are just going to press up on those receivers and just not respect the speed on the field and make it a really difficult to pass the football. It's just the receivers there. It's like you get to a point. I do like Josh Palmer, and I think he's an underrated pro, and I liked his tape at Tennessee to an extent. Quentin Johnston, we'll see if he even plays. DJ Chark is hurt already and was having a good camp. Like Ladd McConkey, I don't know how often they're even going to put him on the field personally in his first year. So I just get a little concerned there with like the weapons and him being able to generate efficiency with those guys. But we'll see.
Let's wrap this up. We've put this off for long enough. I want to hear about your Deshaun Watson takes, because he said you're too high on him. Do you have?
No, I didn't say it was too high on him. I said I was
higher than other people. Do you have any expectations for week one? I haven't seen
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be an
That's-
ugly week 1, but
That's
It's
all
not for week 1. I would not start him in week 1.
I just
And
hope that shoulder looks all right.
listen, it's the way fantasy football is played. Listen, I wrote
Right.
the Konami Code article. Like there's a reason why fantasy football is scored to, or we take advantage of it, because it was when I wrote it a long time ago. It was written about Tim Tebow, or that's how long ago.
Nice.
But it was saying like, hey, Tim Tebow sucks as a quarterback, but the way we score rushing points for quarterbacks is weighted, and you guys aren't accounting for this mattering. So these guys that are outright better quarterbacks than Deshaun Watson, and even like Anthony Richardson, I would include in that tier, Jaden Daniels, right?
Right.
The Burrows, the Trevor Lawrences, Herbert was in this for a couple of years. Those guys, from a fantasy football stance, they can't miss. I even Stroud, to a degree, is like he belongs in the same bucket, like the Burrow bucket, because like even from a DFS stance, you look at, he had as many top 6 scoring weeks last year as Anthony Richardson did. Anthony Richardson played 2 full games.
Right.
Like those guys they just have to walk such a fine line of throwing for 300 yards every week, throwing 3 to 4 touchdowns every game, throwing 40 passing touchdowns in a season, because they don't give you anything with their legs and not getting that weighted scoring. I mean, 40 rushing yards is worth a passing touchdown, guys. Like, 20 rushing yards worth half a passing touchdown. It's all these things matter. And if you get a rushing touchdown from these guys, it's worth a passing touchdown and a half.
Right.
So you're able, it's just weighted. And that's why for fantasy football, and it's the floor. People think it's only a ceiling thing. It's actually the inverse. The Konami Code was written as like, no, there's safety with these guys that you're not accounting for. It's then when these guys throw. This is why Josh Allen broke the system, or Cam Newton in 2015, right? Like when you get one of the, or Jalen Hurts 2 years ago, when you get one of these guys paired with a run out where they throw 30 passing touchdowns and throw for 4,000 yards, you can't beat those guys in fantasy football. You can't do it. They score too many damn points. But it was written from a floor stance. A guy like Anthony Richardson, maybe the passing keeps him from being like a top 5 quarterback, but his floor is going to keep him always on board as like a QB1. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. But the weeks where CJ Stroud has 1 passing touchdown or throws for 250 yards, he's dead in your lineup. Like that's where you see the ADP, or you get, because we're going to have breakouts every year. Geno Smith 2 years ago, Jared Goff last year again, coming back, and the Baker Mayfield. Like you'll always be able to arbitrage passing production in the NFL, like with quarterbacks. There'll always be a dude that comes up, whether it's Geno Smith this year or it's like, Purdy from a couple years ago. There'll always be. So any of these guys are just reliant on passing only, and they end up just being good. You're going to run those guys down with your streamers, so that's why you have to value the guys that run. And Deshaun Watson, as gross as it was last year, and he was quantifiably one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL last year, 39th in EPA per dropback out of all 48 quarterbacks, throw 100 more passes. But in his 5 full games, he was a top 10 scorer in 3 of them. Like, it is what it is. It's just the way the game is played.
And for the most part now, like we factor that in, like ADP, like with Richardson and those types of players. But there's those 2 guys standing out who haven't, are still not ranked high. It's Deshaun
He's
and
a villain.
Daniel Jones.
Watson's a villain. No one wants to root for him.
Yeah. And I mean, look, from both cases, like Deshaun and Daniel Jones, they're probably going to be able, if they play all 17 games, they're going to outproduce their ADP because of what Rich just broke down. The question
every Superflex league, I took Daniel Jones as my QB3.
Well, the problem with that is the minute the Giants are out of contention, he's on the bench because he has a $25 million injury guarantee. And
Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers this week. New York Jets 19.5 point implied total.
Oh, I'll still take the shot on just Watson can run one in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, here's the thing about Watson in this matchup, there's still cards to be flipped over here. I mean, the Cowboys are obviously, we have faith in Mike Zimmer as a defensive coordinator. Obviously, for the resume he's built up, he deserves our respect. But this is a team the last 2 years has relied on just like really immense turnover production, the Cowboys defense. And not only that, we know they did not retain Stephon Gilmore. Deron Bland is not going to play in this game. And Trevon Diggs is in his first game back from an ACL tear. Like there still is a lot of wild card
system. Like
there still is an opportunity here for Amari to get loose, so I would still take the rushing and then just the wild card of just like, what if the Cowboys have some growing pains in this transition of, their whole secondary kind of turning over and, Diggs coming back from injury, having opportunities. So I would still just take the shot on the archetype versus Aaron Rodgers.
As much respect as we have for Mike Zimmer, and we do, it's a new system with a lot of turnover in the secondary. That's usually going to take some time, and there's going to be communication issues early on, and this is not a bad time to target. So maybe Deshaun Watson is a sleeper pick for DFS this week that I wasn't even considering.
We got to get out of here.
Yeah, that's probably a bridge too far. Probably a bridge too far.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Myself, this is Beyond the Box Score. Have a great rest of your week or weekend, I guess it is, and we'll talk to you soon.